Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma and Brian E. Roach.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma. I'm here with my good colleague, buddy, and pal one, Mr. Brian E. Roach, with some breaking news. Brian, how's it going, my friend?
Hey, it's always nice to wake up and have something to talk about.
I'll tell you what, and I rolled out of bed a little later than usual today, too. My phone was blowing up. Lucky it was on the charger, because I think it would have been completely dead. Oh, my goodness, the amount of news. If you hadn't heard already, folks, if you're living under a rock, reportedly, and very much so reportedly, not 100% done deal, I think, as we're recording, but pretty much as close as you're going to get with George Pickens needing to pass a physical. He's going to be heading to the Dallas Cowboys in a trade, which involves the Cowboys' future third-round pick and also a swap of late-round picks, a fifth going to the Steelers and a sixth of the Steelers going over to the Cowboys. So, are we surprised, Brian? Maybe timing-wise, it's going to be a surprise, but it was almost like one of those things where you're just, unfortunately, waiting for the call, as they say, when it comes for bad news. Or good news, for that matter.
We talked about it. In the draft, we said, is he going to get traded? Are they going to try and get a second-round pick? And apparently, they very much so tried to do something, but they could not get what they wanted during the draft, and Dallas backed off, and the deal got sweetened after the draft, enough for them to go ahead and do it. Am I surprised? I'm not. At this point, it was pretty clear they were not going to pay huge dollars for two wide receivers, especially for Pickens and some of the issues that he has displayed. As you were telling me earlier, they may have actually tried to extend him, but at the numbers that he wanted, who knows? I'm guessing this is very, I'm just gonna finish with saying this. This is not your grandfather's Steelers, and I am not your grandfather, but be that as it may, it is not your grandfather's Steelers, where they kind of futz around and try and work things and let you go. Man, you don't want to be here, and you're out.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. They've sent some guys packing, but they've also had the stench of some of these guys. I mean, Omar Khan's been around since the early 2000s with this team in various administrative spots, so he remembers what it was like for Mike Wallace to sit out during training camp and demand big dollars, and they gave the money to the younger aspiring star at the time, Antonio Brown, that was far from a household name, but showed some promise. And I can't believe I'm going to back up. Like, a lot of times I don't agree with a lot of the talking heads. It's a lot of quarterbacks that are on radio, all over the place. But, this one was Chase Daniel, and he's made a lot of money as a backup quarterback. And he made a good point. Are you going to pay somebody $30 million a year for the numbers that George Pickens put up? In those numbers, they're not very impressive. He did lead the team in receiving yards, but he was not the leading necessarily receiver. He had Pat Freiermuth had 7 touchdowns. Calvin Austin had 4 touchdowns. And George Pickens brings in 59 catches for 900 yards and 3 touchdowns. And I tweeted this out or posted or whatever X does these days. I X'd it. I said, those are numbers that those aren't becoming of a Steelers wide receiver one. Those are the numbers you would expect from a 2 or a 3 when you had like a Juju or a Martavis Bryant or just Jericho Cotchery. You know what I mean? Like, and I understand, but it's not Ben Roethlisberger out there throwing the football. But as you said, they just gave a huge bag to DK Metcalf. Now, Solomon Wilcots on NFL radio this morning and listening to some of this coverage had said, I might have missed this quote. Maybe he just had it wrong, but I'm going to repeat it and attribute it to him since I heard it from there. But he said, Omar Khan had said they offered a deal or they were working on a deal. And good luck to Dallas, because George Pickens has the same agent as Micah Parsons. You might be seeing this thing like where they had with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins having the same agent in Cincinnati, using 2 players for leverage for one deal. Now, I listened to one of the beat reporters from Dallas was also on with Solomon this morning, and he was talking, and he said, He wasn't a fan of this deal if they don't extend Pickens, but they've already got a lot of money to CeeDee Lamb. Dak Prescott's one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the league. It's like, good luck. Now, the thing that confuses me most is there are folks out there that are upset about this trade, but I think they're the same folks that were talking about whether or not Pickens was legitimately benched for attitude or hamstring when you had that really rough part of the schedule that popped up against the Eagles and the Chiefs and whatnot. So always hearing you with you got a Sprite there? Are you quenching your thirst?
No, this is my, what is it called? Bellevue. Some other sparkling water crap.
Roethlisberger he was grabbing craft beers and stuff. I've always got a coffee or a mug in my hand. You've always got the sparkling water. It's kind of, I think it's it's part of our psyche. But anyways, I don't think there's a winner or loser for this trade. I think it's a good trade for the Cowboys. On the Steelers end, you had started to mention, maybe some character issues. That might have been the reason he was benched last year. We also know that he had to come out a few days after a game and try to apologize for why he didn't want to get physical blocking for Jaylen Warren. We also have seen questionable film where he quit on routes, including one where Russell Wilson ended up with an interception across the middle. I also saw it. You didn't see it as much on TV against the Bengals, where it seemed like something wasn't on the same page, and that's why both of those guys aren't here. And if you're going to be a problem off the field or in the locker room, it's a team sport. And somebody made a comment too. Aaron Rodgers wasn't out there throwing to DK Metcalf just to meet DK Metcalf. George Pickens wasn't involved in some of that, but we were surmising, you put these two on the field together, Metcalf and Pickens, it might attract whatever quarterback talent. There's no other quarterback talent out there. You're going to roll with what you're going to roll with. And I would also think this is far from the only thing that the Steelers had. This was probably always in their plans. It just took a little bit longer for it to materialize.
Yeah, look, I'll give them credit. They didn't panic. They didn't take what was there at the time. They stuck to, we're going to get the best we can get, and waited until after the draft. We expected them to try and get it too. Look, I told you this in text. I think that the rest of the league is starting to learn that you don't monkey with Omar Khan, right? And you don't take receivers that the Steelers are passing on. Because, let's go down the history. When the Steelers are done with a receiver, how often have they gone on to future success? And the answer's very rarely. I don't even know if I could think of, other than Emmanuel Sanders. Yeah,
Manny Sanders.
Beyond that, and that's a long time ago. Chase Claypool, dead. Dead in the water as soon as he goes anywhere else. Mike Wallace didn't perform well once he left. AB was insane by the time he left, so I'll discount that one.
Juju.
But Juju.
He's another one.
Juju is another one.
Not that James Washington performed, but really the only guy was Plax, and he had the whole nightclub gun incident or whatever, and kind of disappeared out of the league for a minute. And then it was just Sanders. I can't think of anybody else. You're right. And Kabali had said, since those guys were drafted, are the Steelers really still the wide receiver factory aside from that group? And I'm like, what are you talking about? They had Hines Ward and Plax and Holmes, and Nate Washington had a very long career. And Randall L., he bounced around a little bit and was pretty solid. They had guys before, and then as you said after, you still have Martavis Bryant, you still have Juju, you still have Deontay Johnson. Further faults, they seem to cut loose at just the right time.
Yeah, I think that they have gotten a sense of whether the guy that they are working with is going to continue to grow and mature and become a better player, or whether that guy is going to become a problem. And when you talk about guys like Deontay and Pickens, the juice ain't worth the squeeze is essentially the way it works, right? And for everybody that's upset, oh my God, but we could have had this great offense, an incredible tandem out there. Are you kidding yourself that we were going to win this year, right? This is not, I think it's very clear that the Steelers are going to say it's always a championship. That's always our goal, because it is, but reality does set in. This is not a team that was going to win a championship in 2025-26, right? And you're building for next year, and all of a sudden the amount of capital that they are, essentially acclimating here or accumulating, is pretty intense, and they're going to have a lot of ability to play around in the 2026 draft.
Yeah, well, there's a few ways of looking at this. I don't want to suddenly sound like the guy that's turned on Pickens. You know, I've made more excuses, or have tried to at least hope that the maturity would get there. I think he just turned 24. He's still a very young player, mentally and physically. Could be a great find for the Cowboys. The potential's there. That's what everyone's screaming about. But at the other side, are you gambling for a 17-game season to have somebody be mature in every moment? And we saw Cam Hayward and Broderick Jones, obviously the guiding light for him on the sidelines. Many times we saw that last season. And I think it was just one of these things where he said, oh, you know what, it's time to cut bait. Let's talk about this. 8 games, 8 100-yard games. Again, I don't think this is out of 48. So there's 40 games. You know, that's just not. DeAndre Hopkins was doing this with, you know, TJ Yates and guys like that, Davis Mills as his quarterback. So we can't just necessarily say, well, they were bad quarterbacks, because there are definitely receivers who've done it with less, right? The touchdowns, just 3 touchdowns. I mean, he's only had 1 game where he scored 2 touchdowns. He's only had 11 games of those 48, a quarter where he's actually had a receiving touchdown. These are problematic numbers. Double-digit receiving games? 0. This is the kind of production where a 3rd-round pick, thank you, sir, may I have another? I know we wanted more, because we're basing this on the potential, the superstar potential that could be George Pickens. Made phenomenal catches, bailing out guys like Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett and even Mason Rudolph or Russell Wilson at times. Justin Fields, of course, in that conversation. But in the grand scheme of things, the production, it's just not there at all. And I believe, even with what they've currently got on the roster, you could replace that. You could find ways to replace that.
Well, and I think that's what they're counting on. I mean, they don't know what they have in Roman Wilson yet, and they're going to figure that out, right? I think they know what they have in Calvin Austin. They signed Robert Woods. You know, they've got DK, and they're depending on DK, right? They've made the investment in a guy who has been more, I guess, has a better pedigree overall. The thing with Pickens is you get blinded by the flashes of brilliance, right? Mm-hmm. You get blinded by the catches where you're like, holy moly, how did he do that? And then he disappears for the next 3 series, right? You made a very good point, and I want to emphasize this, right? A true number one, an elite number one, a Jamar Chase level number one, right? Those kind of guys, they succeed regardless of who's at quarterback, because they make the quarterback better. They make them look better. Look, a lot of people were talking about Colorado and the fact that Shedeur Sanders got made to look better because of the wide receiving talent he had. Same thing with Will Howard. He got to look better because Ohio State has a slew of number one receivers on their roster. You know, those guys make bad quarterbacks look good. And I'm not saying Shedeur Sanders is a bad quarterback or that Will Howard is a bad quarterback. I'm simply saying they look better than they may actually be because of the talent that was around them. A truly talented wide receiver does not put up those numbers regardless of who the quarterback is, right? They make that quarterback look better.
Mm-hmm. And Pickens was not necessarily doing that. DK Metcalf can do that, and we have the unknown. Obviously, the Steelers did not. Now, putting Pickens with Metcalf, that's a salivating concept. Whether you have Rudolph back there, whether you think Will Howard has a high ceiling, exciting rookie, whether Aaron Rodgers signs, it sounds enticing until you have one of those moments where the ball gets turned over because he gives up on a play. Comes over the sidelines, and you got to, you know, none of that. It just ratchets up the intensity. It's a team game. You got to fit in as a team. This was time to maybe move on, but somebody had also made the comment I've seen around. Why not get as much as you can out of him this year, and you're going to get a comp pick when he goes somewhere else? Well, they were trying to keep him. I guess maybe they felt it was there, but you get that pick next year instead of waiting until 2027, where the Steelers got a lot of picks and we don't know necessarily what they're trying to build in next year's draft. But it looks like they're trying to build something by stockpiling the ammunition to move around, whether that's just more ammunition to make another trade for somebody else. They didn't draft anyone this year. The wide receiver class was pretty poor. It's the reason the Cowboys didn't. McMillan didn't fall to them, as many people have mocked. So they go out and get Pickens. It's the same boat. And now the Steelers are in it, and perhaps they maybe they're looking at another team that may have a cap casualty, maybe someone that gets released. Maybe they make a trade. There's already rumors about, a loaded wide receiver room in Chicago with DJ Moore. There's already some talk. If Rodgers comes, maybe they talk with the Jets about Alan Lazard. I'm not too excited about trading for either of those guys. You look at the free agent market. The two top names that are left, basically the only ones that I'd have any interest in, Keenan Allen, who's 33 years old. I mean, Robert Woods is too, but Robert Woods is going to play special teams, free up Calvin Austin. So those were some tea leaves going there already. It's like, we want Calvin Austin to play more on the field. Mike Tomlin he tried to get AB out of that role for years. He didn't want him pulling double duty and getting hurt, returning kicks or punts or whatever. So Keenan Allen's out there, reliable hand. He actually has been healthy over the years. And Amari Cooper's the other one. The Steelers have very intimate knowledge of watching his film over this last several years. And over the last 3 years, split a year with the Bills last year after the Browns traded him. He put up more yards, more receptions, and more touchdowns than George Pickens did. And he's 30 going on 31. That's that year where we're kind of like, maybe you could squeeze a little more juice out of the player. So if they dip into the free agent pool, those are the guys that are available. Maybe some of the trades that aren't. But as you mentioned, the guys are on the roster, the players that are still left. We're not looking at Scotty Miller or Ben Skowronek. Those are the scrappy. Those are the guys that are also playing special teams, maybe your fourth wide receiver. Robert Woods is probably your third guy or fourth guy. Let's see what Calvin Austin with a 4.2 40 speed or a 4.3 40 speed from Roman Wilson, who we didn't see at all last season. Let's see what they do. Calvin Austin caught more TDs last year, and his yards per reception was just off by 1/10 of what George Pickens had.
All good points. I think this is a team that understands where they are in their growth cycle, right? They know that they're missing the number one component, which is a quarterback. And I think they're making all the plans that they can make to prepare themselves if they don't have one in 2026 to try and go get one. We'll see. Again, we keep talking about next year's quarterback class is going to be better, but we don't, we talked about this last time. We don't know that. We are projecting that we think it's going to be better. Arch Manning could stink. We don't know yet. The guy hasn't played enough for us to have a real idea of his level of skill, right? He could stink. Some other quarterback someplace else, could all of a sudden pop up and everybody's salivating. We won't know until the college football season gets underway what this is really going to look like. But the expectation is it's a better group of guys coming out next year. But even if it isn't, giving themselves all this draft capital allows them some movement to improve the team consistently. They know that they are in the R word, the rebuild process. And while we don't want to hear that, that is what's going on. They're not in championship position right now. They're not set to try and compete with everybody else. Look, lightning always can flash, right? It can strike any time. You never know. They could suddenly, find magic in a bottle and go all the way and win a championship, even with this group, because stranger things have happened. But it's unlikely. And I think they're preparing correctly for that to try and move forward.
Yeah, I hear you with that. It just strikes me as odd. Like, we're talking about where's the production, where does all this go? Like, I didn't feel the Pickens we were hoping would be wide receiver one, and it just never really materialized last year. He was the only guy. That mean he was double teamed. Does DK Metcalf do that? Help that? And then does DK Metcalf come in, and then you have a 1A and a 1B, or do you have two dogs, one bone, and then they're actually snarling at each other for it? We were talking about that dynamic too. But just everything else, as far as the extra receiver that gets thrown out there, just kind of reeks of like bringing an Allen Robinson in, a Van Jefferson in, a Mike Williams in, just somebody that's an extra body, but you've got a proven commodity. You don't have a question mark of, will this guy be able to do it? Like you said, a few flashes here or there, but not always on the go, not wanting to be physical. We know Roman Wilson is a physical player. That's the way that Harbaugh played with that national championship team up with that team up north. We don't refer to their full name, but anyways, we'll see how he returns to this. They might see things or know things on the practice field that we don't know, that we don't see, and there's probably other things behind the scenes where Pickens is he's a handful to contain, and a lot of people want to blame Mike Tomlin. I was listening. Todd Haley, he handled this one fan that called in great, Brian, because the fan immediately talks about Mike Tomlin, and Haley cut him off and said, hey, I worked with Mike Tomlin. You're not going to find, this is a great head coach. You're not going to find a guy that lives and breathes football more than this, the way he handles things, et cetera, et cetera. This isn't necessarily a Mike Tomlin thing. I'm not going to place that on Mike Tomlin, having been a Pittsburgh Steelers coach, having seen the kind of personalities and characters that are in that locker room and how it's handled behind the scenes. I can tell you, even though you said you are a season ticket holder and your daddy and daddy's daddy before that, since 1971 or whatever the guy said, apparently that it has him entitled, but we hear all those same negative storylines, the same stuff. The Cowboys are actually a mediocre team. What have they done? You want to talk about a one playoff win since I think they won the Super Bowls in the 90s. Steelers could be headed there. You never know, but they're trying not to. These are all moves not to. There's people that say they're not convinced with Omar Khan. Maybe they wait for they could get another comp pick with it. That's in 2027. That's that comp. That's way down the line. Who knows how high that pick is? Maybe it's a third rounder. Maybe it's not a third rounder. They get the Cowboys third rounder now, and then they also get to improve a little bit in the later rounds, and that might be a pick that they use. Maybe if they go after a Lazard, maybe if they go after a DJ Moore, then everyone may not cry and complain so much when you're putting more proven talent that's out there. And I'm not saying that those guys are necessarily 100% available. That's just kind of where the rumors start to go because, the Steelers got rid of a wide receiver. It means they need to get another. And we've seen in the past where that's just a false narrative, and they're just going to roll with the guys that are already on the roster. And that includes someone we mentioned as being a potential wide receiver 2 last year in Pat Freiermuth, who just so happened to have a pretty solid season and led the team in receiving touchdowns with 7.
Yeah, and look, we know that Arthur Smith likes tight ends to be mixed into his offense. I just think, it's a move that is, like I said, not surprising. It's a move that is focused on the future and understanding where they are at this point in time, and gives them the freedom to avoid external more drama than they need. Right? They don't have to worry about a hold in right as the season starts. They don't have to worry that Pickens is going to become a distraction because he's not getting enough. And fine, give that potential baggage to the Cowboys. If they can't extend him, do you think he's going to be happy? Right? If they don't get him the money that he thinks he's deserves and is worth, and find a way to extend him before the season, you think that he's gonna be just a stand-up citizen and do everything right? I don't know. I hope he does. I hope this is like a wake-up call for him. I don't wish the guy to fail.
No, not at all.
I hope he has success. It's the Cowboys, so I don't really hope it that much, but I do hope that he has success and finds a way to extend his career and move on. But I don't know. I don't see that. I don't see this as a hugely disappointing move. I see it as a completely expected thing. I've been talking about it forever. You've been talking about it as a potentiality. And the fact that it's happened now just means they figured out when they could get what they thought they wanted to get out of it.
Yeah, and they probably did want it during the draft. They didn't get it. Everyone's going to blame, but everybody's sitting there. It wasn't like this really deep draft class either, but the Cowboys were sitting there a little higher. They were probably one of the primary targets in the talks. And, Mark Caboli said that it wasn't, or maybe it was Jerry Dulac. One or the other just said it kind of just materialized, but I'm sure there were talks. You've got the combine, you've got all the owners and everything else, all these meetings that happen during the offseason where, we have legal tampering and all this, and they get to talk about who's available, who's on the table. So they all know this. They all know behind the scenes. Nobody's going to bury anyone, throw anyone under the bus, anything like that. It's just, I think the Cowboys, maybe their offense becomes better. They've got offensive line problems. They've had trouble running the ball, but they've got Dak Prescott. He slings the ball all over the place. Could be a good landing spot for George Pickens. If he gets an extension and gets a lot of money, then we'll be able to, with confidence, say, well, would you have paid X amount of dollars for him? Because if Omar Khan had a deal that was out there and he refused it, he's obviously thinking he's worth more and will produce more. But as you mentioned very earlier in our broadcast here, there were some other guys that thought very highly of their talents, like a Chase Claypool, for example, that didn't materialize into bigger and better things and just kind of disappeared off of planet Earth. So,
look, this is guy that's got a true number one now with him, right? If he thinks he's a true number one, he's not going to be the number one in Dallas. CeeDee Lamb is the number one receiver in Dallas and is more of a definite true number one. But that might open things up for George Pickens. Maybe he has a better year because of it. We just have to wait and see. It is my expectation is that nothing changes, right? I'm going to tell you, my expectation is that this follows the same pattern of most Steelers receivers who have moved on from the team. And while he may have some level of success, he's not going to suddenly become the number one receiver that he thinks he might be.
Yeah, what if he goes out there and just completely is a knucklehead? What if he goes out there and puts up fewer yards than last year, still has 2 or 3 touchdowns? Isn't that going to be much of a comp pick coming? You know what I mean? Probably not in the 3rd round range anyways. So selling high, just 2 100-yard games last year, 3 touchdowns. Selling, not even 1,000-yard season. Selling high was probably wise. We kind of saw it coming. We had that gut feeling. Would I have kept him long term? Depends if his attitude would have been proper. The potential is certainly there. So now what do you do? Does this weaken the Steelers? I think if you're looking at 2025... yeah, it definitely could. It could also mean opportunity for other players, as we mentioned, Austin, Wilson. Heck, even Robert Woods might still have a trick or two up his sleeve if he gets out on the field. Maybe they make a move for somebody else, and this is like George Pickens is long forgotten by the time we're in October, right? So who's to say? We don't know yet. Our knee-jerk reactions. It does appear that it's like, wow, well, the wide receiver room takes a hit. But at the same time, you look at 2026, the draft is in Pittsburgh, and they've got like a dozen picks sitting there lying in wait. They can move around the draft board. It doesn't mean that they're going to go after a quarterback. What happens if Rudolph or Howard ends up like showing out, and you're like, well, they've got that solved. Then they could throw something else out there. Maybe they use a 1st rounder on a wide receiver. You'd never, ever know. Likewise, like the Cowboys, they're in transition, right? They got a new head coach. They had a losing season because Dak was hurt for much of it. So moving on from Pickens at this particular juncture, it's just, for me, it wasn't necessarily that he's a bad player. It's just the inconsistency with maybe the attitude. And like you said, the extra distractions that are going to come when we get to July and August, when you're in training camp, you're in the preseason, he's not out there working out. We've seen this before with like Deontay Johnson. It's another guy they cut bait with that's bounced around to like 3 other teams already in a year. And the Steelers at least got Dante Jackson out of that, of his services for a year in a trade. So they just seem to have always have their finger on the pulse of who to find, who to develop, and when to move on or when to extend that player. And I'm just going to trust that organization. I'm going to trust the scouting department in the front office that they're making the right move here, and they get a guaranteed 3rd round pick that will be higher than a comp pick regardless of where the Cowboys finish. And then they get to swap and move up a little bit in an extra round. That, like I said, that might help because we've seen Omar make these moves in season too. Went after Mike Williams, went after Preston Smith when they feel that they could win now, trying to add some more bodies to bolster the roster and try and get over the hump of winning a playoff game. Try to get over the hump of beating teams like the Ravens, the Eagles, the Kansas City Chiefs. So I don't necessarily see it as a weak move. A lot of people say the Steelers don't lay down for a season. I think Mike Tomlin could coach. You could throw the replacements out there, and he's somehow going to do it.
Like I said, he won with Mason and Duck, right? Like I just can't tell you. Like I don't think it's in Mike Tomlin's nature to tank, and I think that he can get to an 8-win or a 9-win season, as you said, with the replacements. he's just going to get the best out of whoever he's got.
I know. He beat Tom Brady with the Buccaneers with like Sidney Jones, and who was the other corner? These were guys that got like seriously hurt. They were highly thought of in the draft process, but were pretty much out of the league, on practice squads, from the street. They had like all those DBs hurt, and he had to start both of those guys against Tom Brady at home with Mitch Trubisky. I think, did Trubisky start, or Trubisky came in because Pickett got knocked out?
Yeah, I don't remember.
And whatever was the case, like they still were able, that still just blows my mind that something like that occurs. A lesser coach, it's not going to happen. I'm not saying there aren't other coaches in the NFL that can't get that done. I'm sure Andy Reid can figure something out and game plan around it. Among others, probably John Harbaugh, McVay with the Rams, somebody like that, probably, most definitely, right? But not everybody can do that. Not everyone in the league. I don't know if half the teams have a settled coach kind of thing going on for long term. They may have a guy that they're hitched to. That latter, a quarter of those teams, like, okay, we got somebody that's under contract. We're going to look at him this year, maybe the next year. Oh, we'll see how this works. It's a brand new head coach, or there's definitely dudes that are on the hot seat too. So somebody's going to be like, oh, well, Mike Tomlin, mediocre, this and that. And it's like, this still isn't the Jets. This still isn't the Raiders. This isn't, the Cowboys situation. The Cowboys won like 12 games prior to last year in each of the previous 2-3 seasons with McCarthy, and then they're just like, c'est la vie. I don't know that I feel so great about that either with first-time head coach. That seemed like such a shotgun decision. You don't know, like, if you're on the other side of this and you're like, it's kind of the same way we felt. They gave up a 2 and then made DK Metcalf like the 4th highest paid wide receiver in the NFL. Can you do that though when you already have CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott under those contracts? I don't know. So like when I'm always comparing to other teams, try to keep it into perspective. The one I want to bring up, I think we talked enough about all of the other wide receivers, talked about the offense. It's going to be young. They're going to have to gel. Offensive line, whoever the quarterback is. Metcalf is new. Arthur Smith entering a second year. A lot of moving parts. It may be painful to watch in September. It's going to be extension of preseason stuff like we said before, right? Defensively, you would hope that the Steelers are going to be better. And that they're going to be not give up 28 to 30 points per game and give up 200 some yards to Derrick Henry. You got to hope that those moves are in place. And I know that there's some trade happy folks that are out there that are already like, well, the next move is get rid of TJ Watt. Let's make this very clear. TJ Watt and George Pickens, you're talking about an elite generational player who has led the league in his statistical categories at his position and won an MVP on his side of the ball versus a guy that scored 3 touchdowns. Like, these are not the same category. They are not. Do not move on from TJ Watt. I think that would be the biggest mistake. I think a lot of people look at it and say, well, everybody's getting this $40 million a year bag now. And well, now that they're not giving any money to George Pickens, you lock up TJ Watt as a Steeler for life, because when he's not on the field, you don't win games.
Yeah, look, I've said this before and I'll say it again. Somebody wants to be stupid, right? And come and say, hey, we'll give you 2 first-rounders and maybe 3 first-rounders or some giant pot of gold for TJ Watt. Fine, you have to at least take the phone call. But, to try and go out and look for a deal for TJ Watt? No, they're not doing that. I just don't buy that for a second. As you said, it's a generational kind of player. He's a Cam Hayward kind of guy, right? They don't want him in any other jersey. They want him to be a one jersey, one helmet kind of guy. That's what they want. And I think that's probably what TJ wants too. The question will just be, can they make arrangements to make it happen? And as you said, you're not paying Pickens now. Maybe you find a way to do it.
I got to share. There's a tweet out here. I don't know if his name's Joe Beldner, but it was just kind of more of a joke. Rumored wide receiver 2 replacements in Pittsburgh: Alan Lazard, Randall Cobb, Jordy Nelson, Greg Jennings, Donald Driver, Jermichael Finley, like a bunch of old Packers. I'm not even sure that Aaron Rodgers played with all of those guys. Like, Donald Driver was probably pretty old by the time Rodgers played. I think he did play in that Super Bowl against the Steelers, but that's hilarious. I absolutely love some of the tongue-in-cheek stuff. Hey, you know what? Keenan Allen was fairly healthy last year. He had over 1,000 yards with Caleb Williams as a rookie quarterback in a mess of an offense that was the Chicago Bears. he might still have something to offer. You got some guys that you could still get a little bit out of. Like I said, Amari Cooper had actually put up better numbers over the last few seasons. Look who he had to play with for quarterbacks. Deshaun Watson and everybody else that was in Cleveland, right? Including the timeless Joe Flacco. But I know it didn't work in Buffalo, but you just can't show up maybe sometimes mid-season and have it work. The same problem Mike Williams had coming to the Steelers. So we'll see. It doesn't get me super excited to replace George Pickens with one of those guys, but it does make me feel a little more at ease to put experienced leaders on the field who are proven bodies, provided they could be there for a 17-game season, not break the bank, something like that. I did have somebody say something to me the other day that I will address real quick before we sign off, Brian. They said the Steelers are cheap. And I know it's going to come out somewhere. Yeah, exactly. And I like, it insulted me to my fiber because I know that's not true. Oh, the Rooneys are cheap. They do this because they're cheap. They don't have enough coaches because they're cheap. Their players go because they're cheap. No. Mike Wallace, number one, when you're paying Ben Roethlisberger among the top of the quarterbacks in the NFL for many years, you don't have the money to spread around. But somehow, in that period of time, they found a way to make Marquise Pouncey the highest paid center. They found ways to pay Polamalu. They found a way to make Lamar Woodley the highest paid defensive contract at the Steelers at the time. TJ Watt, again, later on, same difference. Minka Fitzpatrick. So that's just baloney. It's just a load of BS, and I don't buy it. The money, when it comes to Pickens, was, look, the production doesn't line up with what you're asking. Toodles, we're going to get something out of you before we don't.
There's a difference between being cheap and being dumb, right? The Steelers spend wisely. They spend on proven commodities. They spend on production. They spend on what they believe is going to be an elite player. They are not going to ridiculously overpay if they don't think the value is there. That doesn't make them cheap, right? You could spend $240 million for a quarterback that never plays for you, right? They just aren't going to do those kinds of things.
Yeah, for real, my dude. Well, that was about it with I think the worst takes that I've heard over the week. For the most part, though, like a lot of what I'm hearing, it's just, I can't figure out if people wanted to make up their minds as to whether or not they wanted Pickens or they didn't want Pickens. It was like they didn't want him, but yet they didn't want him. They still wanted him a little bit, just enough that they didn't want to see him traded, or they felt that they should have gotten like the moon for him. And it's, I think this was fair. I think for both teams, we'll see, who wins the trade. But the Steelers have proven time and again that they could find players at the wide receiver position. Just got to figure out who's throwing the ball. Is Aaron Rodgers coming? Some people think that's going to happen by the offseason workouts when they start around the corner. The rookie mini camp's up first, so we'll see how that plays out. We'll see if there's any contracts awarded out of that, and we'll be back around to you sometime next week as we cover some of that, and we'll see if Mr. Rodgers finds a neighborhood somewhere, like in the Pittsburgh area. We don't know.
That's very funny. Very, 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 very funny. I see what you did there.
I'm not holding out for him, though. Like, I still don't think that he does. It's the same thing as Pickens leaving. Yeah, it's the same thing as Pickens leaving. I think Calvin Austin could put up a lot of those same numbers if given the opportunity. Maybe one of the younger guys. They're an unknown. And it's the same thing with the quarterbacks. Rudolph is still, like, he's starting to get too known, but he's still got enough there that we don't truly know. Will Howard's a complete wild card. He could be a totally bad. He could end up being a shocking surprise. But Aaron Rodgers, soon to be 42-year-old quarterback, that came off of a major injury the year before, and I just don't know that he's still, it starts to level out where you've got the player that's got this ceiling and this guy's floor and ceiling are like lower than what it used to be because he just can't perform at the same level he once did.
I'm just going to say the same thing I've been saying. I would prefer he not be here.
Yeah.
But if he is here, I will root for him, and then I will feel it is necessary to take a shower after every game because I'll feel dirty.
or as we usually do, Brian, we'll just end up telling everybody, see, I told you so. Yeah. I've never been that kind of guy. And usually I don't pat myself on the back or gloat about some of these moves. A lot of it is business. It is, these are still human beings that we have to talk about, and I wouldn't like to want somebody talking shit about me. So, yeah,
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I got feelings too, so I try to see the human side of it.
I've talked a lot of shit about Aaron Rodgers, and
Yeah.
I'm not backing off of any of it. If he's here, then he's a Steeler. But I will, in my gut, not be happy about it, but we'll root for him to succeed. And
The name
I
on
can tell you
the
one
front.
thing.
The name on the
There
front,
will
not the one on the back.
There will never be an Aaron Rodgers helmet back there, regardless of whether he shows up here or not. That
you know
will
what?
never happen.
That's kind of funny because the photo I'm going to point at here in a second over my shoulder has been rotating. It was Juju Smith-Schuster knocking out Perfect until Schuster left. And then I'm like, well, what do I put there next? And I don't remember what the next one was. I think it was Kenny Pickett from the draft. And then Russ signed last year. Now it's Mason signing some papers. It's the ever-rotating image. I'm about to just go with the Sports Illustrated cover of Lambert, which is just nudged above there, and just leave that. But Brian, thank you, buddy, for joining me once again, joining Steelers Nation. We'll be back at it as soon as we have some more. If we have more breaking news, we'll be right back on the horn. If not, we'll be covering some more off-season workout stuff and just continue to look at this roster, see how it evolves, see what else the Steelers could do. Getting excited for the season is, I'll always be excited. But right now, it's like a lot of these things are very like low key. It's just kind of like they're riding it out. They're cutting out the cancer. And they're trying to heal, and it might be a 2-year process to do that. So, till next time, folks, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. My name's Joe. His name's Brian. Follow him too over at not the one he used to have before that.
Whatever it's called now. Yeah, I don't know what the
SCU.
old one was. Yeah, I'm still annoyed by that.
Yeah,
whatever.
Had his account hacked many years ago. So if you don't, a year ago or whatever. So give Brian a follow.
Ago.
Give Brian a follow too. Leave a rating, review wherever you're watching or listening from. Video version available on one of our Spotify feeds next day. Till next time, as we always do, we encourage everyone out there to be safe, be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.